Good morning. Government ministers due to give an update on the parole status of the killer of Chris Hani, Janusz Walus, this morning. Walus was granted parole in December 2022 after spending 28 years behind bars. He was first convicted in October 1993 for the murder of the then Secretary General of the South African Communist Party. Hani was shot dead outside his home in Johannesburg. Walus's release follows a constitutional court order that ordered that the Polish immigrant be placed on parole. He was then granted permanent residence to allow him to serve his parole period in South Africa. Newzroom Afrika's political editor, Lukhanyo Calata, following this story for us. He joins us now. Lukhanyo, good morning to you. Obviously difficult to know exactly what's going to be announced, but presumably this will be the formal end of Janusz Walus's sentence.
Stephen, good morning. Yes, indeed. Janusz Walus was released on parole on the 7th of December 2022. He was meant to have started that parole on the 1st of December, but he was then involved in a stabbing incident in this prison just behind me, the Hosi Mampuru Correctional Center, around about, towards the end of November. He then ended up having to stay an additional week up until the 7th of December 2022, where he was then released on parole. As you've correctly pointed out, he was then granted permanent residency, and he's been in the country, obviously serving that 2-year parole, following the 28 years that he had been in prison, for the murder of former SACP leader Chris Hani. So tomorrow, which is the 7th of December, marks exactly 2 years, Stephen, up until the date that he was released, which means he completes his parole for the murder of Chris Hani. Stephen?
Lukhanyo, the South African Communist Party for many years consistently opposed the release of Janusz Walus, and if I remember correctly, partly because they say he hasn't told the entire truth about what happened.
Indeed, Stephen. I think obviously Chris Hani, as you would remember, was a much-loved, very much loved leader in this country, former MK leader, quite senior within the South African Communist Party and, of course, the African National Congress itself. So when he was killed, in the manner that he was killed, there was a lot of people that always felt that, particularly the SACP and, of course, his family, that always felt that we never really got to the truth behind his murder. This was despite his conviction, of course, alongside Clive Derby Lewis, and the two of them being originally sentenced to death. But when South Africa became a democracy in 1994, that sentence was then commuted to a life sentence. Derby Lewis then spent 28 years before the Constitutional Court then found that the repeated attempts to deny him that parole was irrational and then ordered his release. So I can imagine, Stephen, that there's going to be a lot of unhappy people, particularly within the SACP, about the announcement that we expect from the government today. Just very briefly, I managed to reach out to Mrs. Chris Hani Udimpo a little bit earlier, Stephen. Unfortunately, she declined my request for an interview or for comment, but she did send me a cryptic note, Stephen, that basically said that black lives are cheap in South Africa. Stephen.